Well, I haven't really understood whether I should conclude by summing up what's been said or sum up so that we can conclude, and that's the fault of the organizers, because the program had so much in it, it was so lively, and we had such wonderful speakers that it's very difficult to try and find a thread bringing everything together. However, I shall stick with the title, which is Reverse Innovation. And that has been the theme of our 2 days of meetings. And an outstanding meeting it has been. Now, reverse innovation is not something which is extremely recent. For the last 1,000 years or more, we had Avicenne and his view of medicine, which influenced Europe. Well before the 18th century, we had realization, and starting in China, there's traditional Chinese medicine too. And of course, there's artemisinin, which also deserved a Nobel Prize. So innovation has been around for a long time. And perhaps we've forgotten this because the paradigm of recent history is to consider that inventions in science and technology for developed countries and should then be spread to the rest of the world. But things have changed now, and things have been changing very quickly. The cost of medicine is exploding, and we've reached a dead end in some of the wealthier countries. And we cannot accept a system which is founded on inequality. And if we want quality medicine for everyone, then we're going to end up in an economic bind. And in times of austerity, people thought of looking at technological initiatives, but more importantly, organizational initiatives, some that come from the south. And there are some very important things which have led to what we called innovation global in 2005. Reverse innovation became in 2009. And here we've seen frugal and disruptive innovation here. And we could ask a question. We could ask whether medicine in the future requires us to remember these initiatives, because these combine original features in healthcare policy and technology, but even more importantly, as we've seen today, in training medical workers, paramedical workers. And we mustn't forget that we have to provide information to the general public, because we cannot do anything if it's not accepted by the general public. And that is becoming increasingly difficult to get things accepted by the general public. This is in line with the 6 elements of the WHO healthcare system, which we discussed yesterday morning. And I think the relevance of the forum here is to study reverse innovation through medical deserts, optimization of health expenditure, and new roles for healthcare professionals. We could have expanded on some points, such as technology, but we have seen in the different presentations, we had Brazil, Senegal, Philippines, Morocco, for example, that showed quite remarkable applications, and these were made possible by the widespread use of smartphones in countries that went straight from a situation with no telephone service at all directly to a smartphone. And of course, the costs of telephone and telecom connections have gone down. And what was impossible just a short time ago has now become possible. And we've seen some wonderful examples of such applications over these 2 days. So you've got IT, telephones, tablets, And technology has given us innovative prospects, and we're able to reach large populations at minimal cost. We saw examples in Africa with applications that we still cannot get working. For example, these shared medical records. Yesterday, we saw Brazil and teleconsultation. There was a wonderful presentation on the prevention of diabetes in Senegal. We saw the med trucks to treat medical deserts in Morocco, and we saw the situation with radiology and shortage of radiologists in the Philippines. When we look at the question of medical deserts in France, that presentation showed us that if we want to use what we can get from innovations in countries in the south in our healthcare systems, then we need to do something more than just reorganize our healthcare system, which is all over the place. It's broken up depending on our past history, past culture, and it's reached a point where it is not at optimal efficiency at the moment. But this is not just a French problem, as some may believe, or as some said yesterday. When you look at international publications, and particularly in the English-speaking world, you can see that this is a problem that we find in all our so-called developed countries. So there are lessons that have to be learned from this reverse innovation situation. I'll come back to it. Today, we saw some outstanding examples of frugal innovation for healthcare from India, China, South Africa. And we saw that innovation developed in so-called emerging or developing countries. These days we say emerging, and for some of them they've emerged. And we can see that innovation can sometimes have complex technology. We saw prostheses, cardiac surgery, and this morning we saw cataract operations in Nepal, and that was a very edifying presentation indeed. Why? Because all these procedures are very reliable at minimal cost. And reliability is very important because we tend to think, well, okay, maybe minimal cost, but it's a bit borderline when it comes to quality. No, these are very reliable procedures because, as we've seen, there have been standardized processes, industrial-type standardization, and the operational effectiveness and efficiency are outstanding. And it's quite clear that conditions required for success are not to be implemented one at a time, but all together. And this is what makes it difficult when it comes to importing reverse innovations. Because you need to have expertise and quality, the quality of the people involved, the expertise of the cardiac surgeons, as we saw this morning in the Chinese network, or for the cataract surgeons in Nepal. They have to be absolute experts. And then we have to make sure that indications, not just medical, but general indications, have to be clearly stated. You have to choose the right technology, the best suited to the situations, the most validated technology, and not just the most technologically sophisticated technology that you might want to see in your own department. And now this is where the going gets tough. All of that has to be fully integrated. And we've seen that we need to have a change in attitude in the teams involved. And I'll come back to that. And of course, once again, we need to have it accepted by society, otherwise everything is bound to fail. So today we have seen that reverse innovation presents the same difficulties as what we call medicine of the future. I recently read a report entitled Medicine of the Future, and you come up against the same problems. Because medicine of the future needs us to innovate, and reverse innovation does too, but it needs the same efficiency, the same reliability, and at a lower cost. We need to have everyone working together, the healthcare professionals, the doctors, paramedics, everyone involved. And once again, you have to come up against the question of acceptability. And we stress this in our report. And it has to be accepted by patients and by their families, because things will be imposed on them. Of course, when you look at successful examples, they're a source of great inspiration, and we were able to discuss them. We've seen things develop very quickly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, for example, in Brazil. But does this mean that we can now conclude that reverse innovation will be a catalyst for healthcare policy around the world, which is better than the current policies we have? I think this is the question that we are addressing here at this forum. Obviously, there are benefits in the original countries. Obviously, cataract program is a great success in Nepal, and that's excellent. But could a transfer be made to so-called wealthy countries? For such a transfer to be done, you first need to have a change in governance. You need a new type of governance. And what I'm saying here is not necessarily for France. If you look at the literature, you can find it in all European countries and developed countries. In America, for example. And we saw the example this afternoon of the community center. So we need to have a new type of governance. We need to have broad governance, and it has to be shared. It has to be shared with great cohesion and great commitment from the general public. And for us to have a true spirit of cohesion, well, yesterday people were criticizing us, saying there's no real cohesion in France, but you can find the same thing in a large American hospital. You're going to find conflicts, people dividing up duties and setting up borders. So we need to overcome the skepticism of some people who may be in favor of change in theory, but when it comes to practice, they just defend their own little domain. But I'm not targeting anyone here in particular when I say that. Inertia is not necessarily an institutional phenomenon. You can find inertia at all levels. And in so-called developed countries, the infrastructure is obviously older. You have a centralized system. You have a tradition, the tradition of a hierarchy in a hospital. And that is the opposite of the examples we have of the working of hospital networks, for example, with the Indian networks that have been developed, where the policy is quite different. It's a participatory policy, it's a decentralized decision-making policy, and everyone can be involved and supported. When you look at responsibility on an everyday basis, responsibility applies to the employee entering files of the patient who turns up all the way through to the doctor, and it goes all the way through. But obviously, when you have a system which goes through as a smooth network, you'll have greater efficiency and lower cost because you'll have proper cooperation and you'll have greater continuity of departments. I wasn't here yesterday morning because I was at the hospital. When I saw people being admitted to hospital, going up to the department head, coming back, it was quite obviously the opposite of what you have here in integrated networks, such as you have with some of the networks in India. The change in attitude which we need cannot be done simply by reading articles in professional reviews. And indeed, there aren't that many articles on it at the moment. But we need to do more than just read. We need to have in-depth knowledge of practices. We need to know what is being done in countries where these innovations are emerging, and we need to have knowledge of what's happening in our Western countries. And there aren't many experts in both domains. This obviously does not mean that the transfer of innovations in emerging countries to developed countries. Well, we had the fine example seen earlier of the community center where there was a transfer of practices from Haiti to Boston and then Los Angeles, and that was a very fine example of reverse innovation of organizational practices and to the benefit of poorer communities. But when you have the reverse innovation approach, it's obviously an opportunity that we need to think about. We need to think about it so that we can have better allocation of resources, so that we can have integrated practices, so that we don't have practices scattered around in silos, and reverse innovation for healthcare policy, for whole itinerary of healthcare, means that we have to ask questions which cannot be solved simply by reorganizing the governance of a medical entity. We have to acquire new attitudes and we have to have new standards. When you look at the management and the way some Indian hospitals are run, this could be seen as in line with optimal reliability and security and safety. And we could learn a great deal by studying the experiences in these countries. And reverse innovation could be greater, could have greater efficiency in using equipment and infrastructure. It could help us to optimize clinical processes and improve productivity. And we've talked about delegating tasks, but it's not the same sort of delegation that may be set down in official decrees and orders. But when you look at delegating tasks or transferring tasks, we have to try and bring together all the stakeholders in the broad sense of the term. In other words, everybody has to share the same vision and trust, and have trust based on reciprocal trust. For things to work, that's going to be our goal, and we need to adapt and we need to trust one another to achieve that goal. And I think the great lesson that we have learned today, thanks to our colleagues from the South, is, well, of course, it's difficult to put into practice. It's easy to say it, but it's difficult to put what we've heard about today into practice in our different entities where we work. Of course, so much has been said about reverse innovation, and there's the technological side to it. We've seen innovation with medical devices and things that can be used thanks to computer technology and smartphones, but we have connected systems now which have made so many things possible, and it's made us possible to develop things which were impossible just a very short time ago, and they're possible now at a very low cost. And this can be a source of great industrial development in countries in the South, and they can benefit from it. And we mustn't forget that multinationals, and we've seen examples, we've seen L'Oréal and General Electric, they've had their ultrasound equipment, which has been around for a long time, and they distributed it to rich countries, of course, at a great cost. But we can see that there's the question of industry and technology that has to be dealt with in the context of the South. But what we've focused on here has been operational work, and of course the operational aspect is the basis of the change needed. To conclude, I would say that reverse innovation in healthcare systems, which today are global systems, and that was certainly not the case 20 years ago, reverse innovation is actually a flow of global innovations, and it's a bidirectional flow from north to south and south to north. So we could call this global health, We hear about global health in so many conferences around the world. So I'd like to conclude on that point. And I'd like to thank all of you who have come here. Some of you have traveled great distances, and you have helped us open our horizons to these new concepts, because we don't talk much about reverse innovation in France. And thank you again to the foundation of the French National Academy of Medicine, which organized this forum in these wonderful circumstances. And I think we can thank the Academy, and the president of the Academy will now say a few words before we leave. Thank you very much.